looking to pathways to higher education that are much more affordable. How important do you think it is for innovative models of higher education to bring down costs for students?
I think it's very important. I think it's one of the great promises of these innovations, which is that if you can lower the cost, you can actually serve the students better. I think that the model of federal policy has to be centered around this idea of the student. The fundamental problem is that it's centered around this idea of the institution. The institution is really the driver of federal policy today. But if you look at these new types of providers of post-secondary learning, the kinds of things that are taking place in existing institutions like Southern New Hampshire University, and the new efforts, the General Assemblies, the examples that I mentioned of great types of post-secondary learning existing in other types of cultural institutions, libraries, community-based learning centers, et cetera. This is not all technology-driven. It's very important for us to see these as opportunities to bring down the cost and bring up the quality. In other words, we've got an opportunity here to actually put the students at the center and put their learning, the outcomes that they get, the results that they achieve at the center of the process, as opposed to trying to figure out whether or not this provider or that provider is the right one to do the work. If we can be clear about what the student outcomes are, we can then have an array of providers who get rewarded for serving those students well in the process. And those rewards, I think, will help to bring down these prices and higher costs for the families.
Would this just be saving time? Should we just be focused on that? Or on returning some of these dollars to the students themselves?
Yeah, the money's got to go back to the students. That's the key. Saving the time, if the cost savings aren't going back to the students, then we are not serving their best interests. And their best interests have to be at the heart of this. So I think that's the most critical element of the entire equation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So we're seeing lots of new delivery models that do much of what you've just described. And like our effort to get CBE to work within a time-based system, these programs have to work their way through standards of quality approval and accreditation. Now, the accreditors have been pretty good about allowing a lot of that flexibility. But I still think, you're now almost pointing further down the road to how do we pay for it. And I think there are interesting models of performance-based funded, risk-sharing models. And
except that the federal government heavily subsidizes medical education. So in terms of paying for it, the federal government actually is paying for competency training right now for these sorts of things we've been discussing. Sir, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that the other element of competency here is, as Paul said, what you know is equally important. And part of competency is generalizable skills. So, every degree, every credential that you get from a post-secondary institution should not only tell you something about engineering or graphic design or medicine, it should also give you the tools that you need to be a critical thinker, a problem solver, a communicator. Those things are very important. Employers actually value those things more than the content knowledge in an awful lot of jobs in this country. So figuring out how to develop these systems so that all of the degrees that have students at the center have those competencies that are both generalizable and content specific is going to be an important part of this broad, large-scale demonstration that we're talking about here.
Basically out of time. I yield back. Thank you.
Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in your testimony, several of you talked about federal regulations driving up the costs and preventing colleges from innovating in ways that would make college more affordable. If that's so, then we absolutely should consider changes. But if we're going to loosen federal regulations, we ought to be sure that the colleges are going to pass those savings on to the students. And it seems that some colleges are not willing to do that. Now, at a hearing 2 years ago, I asked Dr. LeBlanc to explain why his college offered an online program that ran a 22% profit margin. And Dr. LeBlanc responded that his university uses the profits to subsidize the college's campus-based program. Bloomberg, the Chronicle of Higher Education, and others have reported that the profits help build a new student center, a dining hall, and an Olympic-sized swimming pool. In other words, the lower cost of an online education wasn't passed along to the students who got the online education. Online education was a cash cow for whatever else the school wanted to buy. Now, this year, at a hearing on the cost of compliance with federal regulators, the president of Vanderbilt said they could save a lot of money if federal regulations were cut. So during the hearing, I asked him, would he commit to using the savings from reduced regulatory costs to bring down the prices for students? And the president wouldn't agree to do that. Instead, he said the university should have the freedom to spend the savings wherever they wanted to spend the savings. So, Mr. Marasotis, you're an expert on higher education policy. Does current law provide enough incentives for colleges to reduce costs for students?
No.
Well, that was easy.
So look,
Easy
you know,
and painful.
here
Yes.
part of the problem is that there are not incentives to lower costs and prices built into the federal formula. There should be rewards built in to the way in which the aid approval process works, so that the institutions that are doing a better job of serving students by producing better outcomes, learning outcomes, employment outcomes, student satisfaction outcomes, that should be a part of the equation. But I think the bigger question here, Senator Warren, is that we really don't have a common understanding of what affordability is in higher education.
I want to stop you there. Wait, I want to underline what you just talked about before we go into the different definitions of affordability. Because the chairman quite rightly pointed out the federal government is putting $136 billion into our schools every single year. And I think what you just described is the schools have no skin in the game. That whether they do a good job or a bad job, as long as they can skirt past their accreditors, they're going to be just fine. They're going to keep 100% of the money. And their incentives then are to attract students in other ways, whether it's Olympic-sized swimming pools or whatever else it is they're going to offer. That's where the incentives lie for the schools right now. And if we don't have schools with some skin in the game, that's not going to change.
And increasing competition so that we expand our understanding of who the providers are of post-secondary learning, I think, is one way to help bring down those costs, creating some incentives so that there is more competition for the college and universities to actually do exactly what you're talking about is very important. My point about affordability is pretty simple, which is that we're all for it, but none of us actually knows what it means. It's hard to find someone who can say, I'm not for a more affordable system. But when we then ask the question, what does affordability mean? We have no common understanding of what that is. I think that is a very important part of the federal policy dialogue. What is an affordable education? What does it actually mean from the student perspective? What is an appropriate amount of money that you could contribute either from earnings or savings to your own education? And if you can't do that, then how do we allocate resources to make sure that if you're low income, if you're a working mother, if you're someone who doesn't have the capacity to do that, that the government's going to be able to support you. Affordability is an eye of the beholder issue for us right now. You can get a bachelor's degree for a few $1,000s a year in tuition or for tens of $1,000s a year in tuition. And this issue, I think, of defining affordability is one of the most important issues we've got to tackle in national policy.
You know, I appreciate that you may be able to say that we can't say exactly where the center of the bullseye is and exactly where the resting point is that we can say college education has become affordable. But I guarantee we can say that it is becoming less and less and less affordable every year. The numbers are pretty clear on that. When it keeps getting...
In reading this testimony, I wonder what issues arise from competency-based education. Because, well, one is testing, and I think, Mr. Marasotis, you may have spoken to this in the hearing here, but I want to know is like, how do you prevent, if someone's taking a test online, how do you prevent them from cheating, from having someone else take the test? And that seems like just an obvious off the top of your head question, but I'm wondering what other kinds of questions arise from competency-based education.
So there are sophisticated technology tools that are now used to be able to assess with retina recognition, with fingerprint recognition. They actually have, believe it or not, programs that can assess whether or not the person typing is the same person typing a few minutes later. So there's actually technology tools that are very sophisticated that allow us to do that. I think the big issue, Senator, in terms of competency-based learning is that we don't have all of the answers. What we know is that it shows a lot of promise to put students at the center and to put their learning objectives, their outcomes at the center of the equation, as opposed to what the institutions say, which is that a credit hour is defined in this certain way based on this certain approach. So putting students at the center, I think, is really the critical element of it. And in a competency-based approach, you can take learning into account, you can take employment outcomes into account, you can take things like student satisfaction into account in defining what you should expect of the institution, what you should expect of the provider of post-secondary learning. That's very different than what we do now.
Okay, I just wonder, like, what some of the, I mean, if you can have somebody typing and someone telling them what the answers are, I just worry about this. And I'm just wondering how much work is being done just on that. And yes, as you said, you have retina and biometrics. I also worry about what you call the digital debacle or the online debacle of repeating that. Don't want to do that, right?
Yeah, certainly do not.
Debacles.
And there are a lot of lessons to learn from that.
That actually
experiment.
is the theme of our committee. Mr. Marasotis, you wrote in your testimony, or maybe in a summary of your testimony, to maximize student success, college costs don't just need to be reduced; they need to be demystified. And I couldn't agree more. Senator Grassley and I wrote a bill that would improve the use of net price calculators, and so that they would, anytime you went on a college website, you'd be able to see that right away. And so that I think there are a lot of kids who look at who take themselves out of contention for schools because they think it's above their ability to get to in terms of cost. And if they went to the net price calculator, it would demystify, if you would, that. And so we also, Senator Grassley and I also have a bill that when you get your award letter, it just says that they have to use, all the colleges have to use the same terminology, a uniform award letter, because there are award letters from, you get award letters from different institutions. They refer to a subsidized, a Stafford subsidized loan as a Stafford subsidized loan, for example, in one school, and another will call it an F5601. And I've had, if schools would just use uniform, because most people don't think of a loan as an award. They think of it as a loan. But they get it in their award letter. So does anybody have any strong feelings about either of those
Yeah,
ideas?
Look, your point is exactly right, which is that there's a cacophony of information that confuses consumers. Consumers, look, tuitions have been increasing at nearly twice the rate of inflation for close to 3 decades. So the train wreck of college affordability is something that's been coming down the track for a very long period of time. The problem is people don't understand sticker price, net price, cost versus price. All of these things are very complicated. And I do think that we need to come to some common understanding about what affordability really looks like. We need to have some sort of benchmark, some sort of understanding of what, from your income and your savings, you should reasonably be able to contribute to support your education. We do not have that kind of a standard in federal policy and state policy, or in the way that we talk about higher education nationally in this country. We're working on some of this right now at Lumina Foundation, and hope to advance some of these ideas to you in the coming months. But I think it is a very important sort of necessary precondition to talking about which federal strategies, which policies are the most important way to deal with what is obviously a crisis in affordability for students in this country.
But why don't we start with you, Mr. Marasotis, and go right down the line. Anything else you'd like for us to?
Thanks, Senator, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to send you more specific suggestions following the hearing. Two important things that I think are worth emphasizing. The first is use federal policy to really incentivize the kind of competition that's going to democratize learning in this country. If we put students at the center, we've got an opportunity here to actually create a different model where we can have new providers who are being held to very high quality standards so that we can actually democratize the learning process, creating competition so that we serve more students and we serve them better. And in a risk-based regulatory model, we should reward or incentivize those institutions that serve the students best in terms of their learning outcomes, their employment outcomes, their satisfaction, et cetera. The second thing I think we need to do in this model is make sure that in the student-centric approach, we put our thumb on the scale of equity. Federal policy has to emphasize the fact that low-income, adult, first-generation, and minority populations are the fastest growing and need to be the ones that are rewarded most through this system. So in this model, we have to make sure that these regulatory structures actually create more incentives for those students and help them succeed their success will result in our collective well-being as a country. So thank you.
Thank you.